What a title! Analyzing student data isn't the key to school improvement. Well, when we hear that, what's your first thought? Seriously? Isn't that what we do as educators? We look at data all the time. So, where would a title like that come from? I saw this article a while back and it caught my attention. The first thing that was there was this question: what activity is done by most teachers in the US but has almost no evidence of effectiveness in raising student scores? And the answer to that was analyzing student assessment data. So that started my thinking about this process. Why do we analyze data in schools? And what makes this researcher, who happens to be a professor at Harvard, say that it's not effective? Because I know that I've been in situations where we've studied data, we've made changes and into instruction, and it has been effective. So, what is the background behind this article about analyzing data? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start back with the thinking that Heather Hill produced in her article about why analyzing student data doesn't work. And if you go back to the very the root of this, the premise, the simple logic is that to improve student outcomes, teachers study the prior test performance, learn what students struggle with, and then adjust the curriculum and the instruction to offer remediation or reteaching or spiraling the curriculum. There's so many things that they can do, but by addressing those weaknesses, overall student achievement would improve. Think about this for a moment. Think about this scenario. I've been in one like this before, and I'm going to bet that you probably have too. Sitting in a professional learning community meeting or a grade level meeting or anywhere where you have groups of teachers who come in to sit down and look at their data. Think about this scenario. The teachers are settled around a table. They open a Google Sheet for their team. They complete a chart with the required formative data, assessment data. They record their answers on a required data form. They look through a pacing guide to see what standards they're going to teach for the upcoming week. And then they decide which assessments they're going to give and how to reteach. Then they just close the Google Sheet or close their notebook wherever they're making their recordings. Not a single teacher takes notes or keeps a copy. Their team agenda was to complete this required task. No discussion about removing barriers to learning or improving outcomes for students or what's working, what's not working. It's just simply completing the task. That's what the researcher from Harvard was talking about. You know, it's often hard for teachers to have conversations about removing barriers or discussing why certain interventions are not working or why an instructional practice that they're using isn't working. It takes a real culture of trust to be able to be that open and vulnerable. And today, with our teacher shortages and the high turnover that we're seeing, many teams haven't had the time needed to build that level of trust in order to ask each other for help. So practices such as this, in having those required times where they just sit down to look at the data, record answers, those kind of practices make it easy to sort and rank students, but there's really not a whole lot more that come out of that many times. There are some researchers that are pushing on the side of being data driven, and instead they remind us to be learner driven. So that's a little different focus there. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Data driven processes are intended to help identify areas of need and to fix the weakness. And I want you to think about that for a moment, to fix that weakness. You know, if people think you're there to fix them, they're going to fight you on everything, whether it's a teacher or a student or just someone in your own family. If they think that you're out to fix them, that's where we run into problems. But if we go a different route, and if people know that they're valued and they see that you're trying to bring out the best in them through what's already there, they're going to be a whole lot more willing to explore new ideas. And that's something that I want to look at in the rest of our time here. So, what we're going to do is to think through a process of just simply reframing. We want to take care of our great teachers, and we want to set expectations for continuous growth and improvement for our students. And so, how can we do those, both of those, and still see growth in our schools? Well, one thing we don't want to do is ditch everything that we're doing and start all over. So we're going to reframe. Reframing is a really specific skill to, it's a set of mind, it's mindset, where you're capable of taking the current situation, seeing it realistically, and then framing the situation with a simple life-changing question. What is the creative opportunity now? Leading schools has been tough since COVID. I know you know that far better than me. And now, with budget constraints and lack of personnel, with attendance issues and other stressors, some voices say that we may never recover or go back to where we were prior to the pandemic. And I'm not sure that we really would want to, even if we could. However, some of the very best ideas have always come during times when people feel a little bit squeezed. So even when you don't know a creative opportunity, you can still do a reframe from a negative thought of, I'm just so stressed out, can be a more positive one of, today, this is a challenge. So the view that we adopt really profoundly affects the way that we lead and the way others respond to us. It affects our choices. We can position ourselves in ways of respect and curiosity and connection, or we can position ourselves on the other side and invite judgment and disconnection and disapproval. So in our reframe, what the next creative opportunity could be to develop a strengths-based school culture and infusing strengths as we consider student data to help generate new ideas to impact student learning. So we don't want to move away from analyzing student data because we know there are times when that works, and it is involved with a process that follows that. Once we've looked at the data, what is it that we're going to do differently with that? But along with that, we want to make sure that there is something that we're working on to build the strengths of both of our teachers and our students. So a strengths-based culture seeks to identify lots of things. When we're looking at strengths, we're looking at social and personal and cultural and structural barriers that interfere with a student's goals and growth and achievement. And it really takes a balanced plan of action for the school to address weaknesses while leveraging the strengths. But when we do that, we are ensuring that we're looking at the whole child to make sure that the whole child feels supported. And I know people talk about this part a lot, but can we do the same for our adults in our schools? Tapping into their strengths and passions ensures that our whole school feels supported. People are motivated when they feel valued and heard. And this is more than just a social committee that plans once a month luncheons or puts goodies in the lounge. This is building on school assets. So you may have heard the term assets-based needs assessment. But what I propose is we look at it from just a little different frame and think about an assets included needs assessment. And when you're talking about that, the assets, it's not one or the other. It's not the opposite of a deficit-based needs assessment. It's including both pieces. In the classroom, an assets-based approach is how good teachers have always recognized, and they're able to grow the desirable qualities that students have so that they can learn new information. For a school, it means much the same thing, but it can also be much bigger and broader. Assets are often the qualities that stakeholders expect in effective schools. And a good place to begin with identifying assets is in the school's needs assessment. An assets included needs assessment won't remove the rain from our schools, but it allows us to see through that rain and be reminded that not everything is bad. If you go out to the media and listen to that, it almost always seems that it's negative. Things are not going well in our schools, but we know that there are lots of good things that are occurring there too. They just don't often make it into the news. Evaluating the assets of a school includes connections and knowledge and potential. And it doesn't mean that we ignore the challenges or we're trying to gloss over those or we spin all the struggles into strengths. That wouldn't be good for anybody. It's a mindset, not negative, not positive, but it's recognizing both. It's not simply one or the other. The emphasis then is looking at a positive outlook and goals. And when we begin with our assets, we can see our students as staff as very vibrant, whole human beings with unique skills and perspectives. The beauty of analyzing and measuring assets is that there are no boundaries. And what I mean by that is when you're examining the problems that we have in school, we all have a framework of accountability. We have state accountability, we have federal accountability, and those things cause us to look to see how our students are doing in math, or how they're scoring in reading, or what their attendance is, graduation rates, all of those things that we're required to look at with accountability. But on the asset side, we're not bound by that same framework. We're free to truly embrace the beautiful and unique people and the qualities and the things associated with the schools. And we want to cultivate these assets and use them as resources to help eliminate the barriers standing in the way of learning. And I want to be really clear here again that focusing on the assets in a needs assessment doesn't mean that we're ignoring the challenges and we're forgetting about problems and root causes. Or operating even from a mindset of very toxic positivity. That approach would be so harmful to everyone. This is about balance. It's about seeing the whole child and not seeing just the deficits. I want to show you a little clip. And right before I came on here today, I was running back through this, and there may be an ad that pops up before this clip, and I apologize. I worked trying to get that ad out, and I hope it doesn't show, but if it does, bear with me for just a moment. And then I want to watch this clip. Some of you may have already seen this, but I want you to look at it again with fresh eyes. As this clip starts, they're going to give you some instructions to count how many times the ball is being passed by the people in the white shirts. So let me click on this and let's see if we can get it to play without the ad.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. Answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com. The monkey business.
Why would I show you a clip like that? If you would in the chat, make a comment. Why would I show you that clip about the monkey business illusion? And what does that have to do with our topic today?
There are some comments here. Lastly, the brain can only effectively focus on one thing at a time. We focus on one measure, we miss all the other things that are happening. To show us that if we are focusing only on needs, we miss the assets that could be leveraged for success. To show us how we miss glaring things when we are hyper-focused on something else.
Absolutely. Every one of those are right on target. That is so true. When we are only looking at the needs that our students have, often we do miss other things that we could work on, the assets that they have. And helping them to grow is it's more than just looking at the things that they need. And that plays over into the plans that we write for our schools. Because if we're only looking at the negatives, then we find things get built into plans like we're going to have tutorials, or where it's all about remediation. It's all about, what are we going to do to add things on for our children, instead of maybe looking at some more creative ways when we're looking through the assets. So in looking at this structure, this is a typical structure for continuous improvement. Now, some of your districts may call some of these terms a little different, different terms, use different terms in here. But basically, when you boil everything away and you're looking at that continuous improvement planning cycle, you're going to find that every variety has both strengths and problems, or strengths and needs, in the needs assessment. And if you look, they are the same size. And many times what happens is we just kind of gloss through the strengths because we get hyper focused over on the problems. And if we want to support our teachers and do a better job of supporting our children, then we want to go back and reflect on this and make sure that when we are looking at our needs assessment, that there's a balance there between the strengths and the problems. A needs assessment, C&A, stands for comprehensive needs assessment, but a needs assessment is truly a gift that we can give our students and staff. It shows them how far they've come, and it can be more than just how much they've improved in reading, how much they've improved in math. We definitely want that there, but there are so many other things that we can look at. I want to take an opportunity for just a moment, and I'm going to give you a little test. So right there in front of you, if you've got a piece of paper, what I'd like for you to do is to put some numbers on your page, and just number 1 through 5. If you think you are an overachiever, if you think you can do well, go ahead and put some more numbers in there. But 1 through 5 is what is required. And I'm going to give you 20 seconds, and we're going to take a little quiz. And of course, since everyone is sitting in their own office, nobody sees your answers or anything, and you're not going to have to share these out. But for the next 20 seconds, here's what I would like for you to do on number 1 through 5. I would like for you to list, what are you not good at, either professionally or personally. So what are you not good at? Ready, go, and stop. So now we're going to do this again. And so I'd like for you to number your paper again, 1 through 5. And I'm going to give you a little different question. And I think you can probably already guess what I'm going to ask you to do. But in 20 seconds, I want you to list as many strengths that you can think of for yourself, personally, professionally. Just write as many strengths as you can. Ready, go. And stop. Which one was easier for you? Write it in the chat. Was it easier to list strengths, or was it easier to list your challenges? Write in the chat.
All right, we're pretty split so far between strengths and challenges.
That's awesome.
Couple more for challenges now. Strengths, yeah, we're split pretty much
Still
50-50.
split.
Yeah.
We have some very gifted people on this webinar because most people will say that it's easier to write challenges than it is strengths. Why do we say that? Why is it that even in a conversation, it's easier sometimes to rattle off things that we are not necessarily great at than it is to talk about our strengths? Why do we do that? Anybody have a thought? As educators, what were we taught to do back in college when we were first learning about the lesson cycle? And yeah, there we go. We work at times so often from that deficit mindset. That's who we are. As educators, we're fixers, aren't we? So when we're working in front of a group of students, all the time we're thinking about how can I help this child? Where is this child struggling? Where are the deficits, the negatives? And so we get into a mindset of looking at that, and it's a little bit harder for us to think about the positives that are there. But we know that if we want to do well in our schools, it's about balance. It's not either or, and it's about providing services when students need them. We of course can't just strengths them away when they have deficits. We provide services and we teach kids how to read when they have struggles there. We want to do that. But going back to that original quote from Dr. Hill at Harvard, if you get deeper into her article, she explains that when our teachers and our PLCs and other teams, when they're only looking at the problems, they seem to often go down the path of things that are out of the school's control. Or they'll identify the problems, but then they just stop talking once those problems are identified. And so that's what we want to work on, is to think about not only the deficit side, but the strengths as well. And how can we leverage those strengths to make things better for students? And not just get to a point to where we say, you know, well, students are not doing well with their homework because parents are not making them do the homework, and then just stopping at that. So that's where Dr. Hill was coming from when she said that looking and analyzing student data is not effective. It's all about what we do with that and the next steps that we take. And one of the best ways to do that is by looking at the assets as well, and looking and talking about how to leverage that. So I want you to take just a moment to think about your district and the things, the activities that your teams are using in looking at data. Are they including ways to leverage assets and strengths in data analysis? Just think for a moment about that. And I'm not going to ask you to respond there, but I do want you to think about the processes that are being used in your district. You know, a good needs assessment is more than just a compliance activity. When you have principals or whomever at the site level filling out the CSA or a bunch of paperwork, that's not really a needs assessment. That's all about compliance. And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about analyzing data for the growth of our school. We want needs assessments that tap into the thoughts and the expertise of a variety of stakeholders for the purpose of truly identifying priorities and then understanding the current status of the school. You know, for several years, when people were talking about needs assessments, they looked at a needs assessment like this. I'll give you just a second to look at some of these bullets that are here. But what we know, and what I know you know, is that a needs assessment is much more than that. A needs assessment is not really a document. The document is a tool, and it's the result of the work that occurs in a needs assessment, but that's only a piece of it. A needs assessment is truly a systemic process. And it's more than just listing the demographics of the school. It's about understanding the demographics of our school, not just kids, but our community and our staff. It's everyone working together and understanding how those pieces interact with each other. And it's more than just listing the academic achievement on our state assessments. We don't need to produce those lists of academic achievement. The state gives us those, but it's how we take that information and analyze it according to where our school is and looking at the growth and what things have made a difference and what things haven't. And it's all about looking at our strengths and figuring out how to take those strengths to leverage them into something that's more positive. And it is about evaluating, even when we don't think we have time to do so. That's one of the most important things that we can possibly do. The needs assessment is really where we find clarity for our schools. And if we're not doing a good job with this, we find that we don't see the growth that we expected. And so we want to make sure that a needs assessment is strong and in place on every site. So how can we possibly do a needs assessment and looking at the school's strengths? How do we find those? How do we know what our schools are good at? And how do we know what our teachers love to do and what comes easily to them? Well, there are a variety of ways that you can do that. And one of the things that I would recommend is starting with our students and looking beyond just what you find in accountability. Here's some areas where we can go to look for school strengths. And this is not an inclusive list. There are probably 100 other things that you can think of in your school that you can look at for the school strengths. These are some of the things that we want to build on. And when you look down through the list here, these are the things that our parents want to talk about. And our community, when the community talks about our schools, they want to talk about all of these other things. And when our employers are looking for graduates, these are some of the skills that they're looking for as well, with engagement and how creative students are, and their social and emotional health. There's so many other things that our communities want to look at. There's some little things that we can do to make a difference for our schools in the way that promotes looking at what is positive and building the strengths. Now, this is a pretty typical analysis that's used in a lot of places. SWOT is not anything that's new. But what I want you to notice in this SWOT analysis, and you know that from the SWOT analysis, you go through each one of these 4 squares, looking at the strengths, looking at the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. But notice in the SWOT analysis, the 2 that are over on the right, the weaknesses and the threats. When you're working with a school team, a lot of times this is where conversations get bogged down because we're so good at looking at the deficits. But with just a little twist, we can take this same process that I know you're familiar with and put a more positive spin on it and still get some of the same deep conversations and maybe even better conversations. So if we look at it from a SOAR aspect, now we're looking for strengths and opportunities, aspirations, and results. And in these 4 areas, strengths, for instance, what can we build on? There are all kinds of questions that we could set up to get people to think deeply about what kind of graduates we want to produce. What are we most proud of in our school? What makes us unique that would cause parents to want to move to our school and stay there? How are we strong? What are the most important steps to take to achieve our vision? And each one of these has its own set of questions. And again, these are only examples. There are lots of other things that you could probably think of to build on the opportunities. In the opportunities, how can we reframe our challenges to be seen as opportunities? And in the aspirations, who do we want to become? And what are we deeply passionate about? What strategic initiatives support our aspirations? So you see with questions like that, what strategic initiatives support our aspirations? That causes people to think beyond just implementing tutorials. Now, tutorials are necessary and we need those, but we don't want it to stop there. What is it that we can do to grow and stretch and to build something that is much deeper than that, that provides much better instruction and learning? And then the results, how do you measure that? Considering our strengths and opportunities and aspirations, what meaningful artifacts indicate that we're on track to achieving our mission? So by just making a little shift in the language that we're using here, we can reframe something that creates conversations that are a lot more positive and looking more towards the strengths that we can find in our school. Here's a question that I pose for you. Could this possibly create a faster path of success if we're looking at strengths? Because, we're all motivated by things that are going well. Students are motivated when they know that they're doing well. They know that there's growth and they're learning, and especially when somebody recognizes that. And our teachers are the same way. They know that things, they know when they're doing well, and that motivates them to go deeper with that. Look at the way this teacher's looking at the students here. That's relationships and it's strengths based, and it helps us understand others and helps them better understand us. Assets and strengths can encourage all of us in our learning journey, and that is something that never stops in a school. So I wanted to do just a quick comparison between two different mindsets with needs assessment. That all familiar one, the needs and the deficits lens, but also looking at it on the other end and looking at the asset lens. You can see the purpose over here on the left in that column, looking at the first one being a starting point in a needs deficit needs assessment. It starts, of course, with the needs that we find in our data. But on the asset side, it's strengths driven. It's about the things that we still might be able to find in the data, but it might not always be appearing in the data, in the data that we typically look at. And then there's, perspective, problem focused and opportunity focused. And you can look on down through this list to see all of these pieces are very important, both on a needs deficit lens and an asset lens. We need both. It's not throwing the baby out with the bath. We need both sides in order to get our schools to move a little bit faster. And it also prevents burnout and reduces some of the dysfunction sometimes that we find when we're talking about plans and needs assessment and strategies. When we've got that asset lens built in there, people are just a little more willing to do the work that needs to be done. Two of the very important pieces of this chart are right down here at the bottom on the long-term impact and also the evaluation. Look at what happens in the long-term impact from a needs perspective, the deficit perspective. We have a tendency to just keep applying strategies and spread ourselves thinner and thinner over time. Think about what's happening right now in your schools. It seems like every year we have a new initiative that we're going to do, and it's going to be the one that's going to change our school. And then we go through the whole year, and it may not produce the results that we want. So in our needs assessment process, some other idea comes up, and the following year we've got another new initiative. And often we don't go back and remove some of those things that we've done in the past. So we're just piling on and piling on. And that's why our teachers get so burned out, because they don't know exactly where they're supposed to be focusing, because there's so many things that are presented to be focused on. So that's from the deficit lens. But look at the asset lens. When we find something that's positive, whether we're just looking at one student, one teacher, or the whole school, when we find something that's positive and we start building on that, it starts snowballing. But it creates energy and a whole different feeling because we're looking at that one thing, and it continues to grow, but it's cohesive. It's not this piece and that piece and this piece. It's a cohesive piece that grows together. And look at the analysis, the evaluation piece. Success in a deficit lens model is measured mostly by assessments. Again, we go back to that accountability rating and looking at those things that we're required to do. But on the asset side, success is measured by relationships. And relationships are what make our schools grow. When students know that teachers care about them and that they're in their court and they're rooting them on, kids are going to work harder. And the same for our teachers. When they know the administration feels that way and they're supporting, when they're out there working and taking chances and doing all the things that they need to do, they're going to be more willing to step in there when they're being supported. So a needs assessment is the difference between where we are and where our vision says we want to be. And that is not always on the deficit side. We want to look and reach that vision through the things that are considered strengths in our school. So for just a moment, take a little bit of time to think about these three. What are your district's expectations for data analysis in a needs assessment? Who's involved in that? Is it just the principal by himself or herself completing a ACSA? Or who's involved in that process? And is it a one-time event? Or is it something that's built in that is a continuous process? And within that process, how can you develop stronger focus on assets and strengths? And how can adding assets move conversations beyond the causes that are out of our control? When we're talking about something that we see that needs to be fixed or changed, instead of taking that approach, how can we say, what is our next creative opportunity? So that we're not there for people to think that we're trying to fix them. We want to look at the whole picture, the full picture of our schools. There's so much richness in every single site. And there are many moments that we are missing when we're not looking at the full picture. Perception truly does alter reality. So there are moments that we might perceive as negative, and when that happens, we miss out on experiencing something that could be a pivot point or a moment of growth. So we want to look at the full picture rather than just one small angle. We want to lean into change and help them flourish in times of change. Reframing is one of the easiest ways to do that. So there are lots of tips and tools that you can use, and in just 1 hour, it's hard to present very many to you, but I want to show you a few things that we can use to help in this positive process. One of these is an asset-based logic model, excuse me. It's sometimes overwhelming, and we can easily become bogged down in all the areas that a student may be falling short. But if teachers can link students' strengths to the not yet known through if and then models, then when a teacher has identified a student's strength, and the strength can become the if portion of the model. The then portion can become the new learning that can be linked to and taught from the current strengths. And that can happen like this. If we have this resource, capacity, and or strength, and maybe the school has a wonderful veterinarian that is located close to the school, and that veterinarian has indicated that they would be willing to partner with the school on certain things. So then number 2 could say, then we can link this to this student's learning need. And maybe the learning need is in math, and students are needing to learn more about equations and how they work. And then number 3, and implement this assets-based strategy. That would be the veterinarian, and maybe the veterinarian has a variety of animals that have to be fed, or they need certain medications to get well. all of those involving math and functions, and then maybe that veterinarian would provide enough information so that the students then could work through the formulas to figure out how often a certain animal needed to be fed or needed medication. So then number 4, seeking this level of successful output, the teacher would figure out, what problems need to be solved and at what level. And then number 5, so that students will demonstrate this level of learning growth. And that could be tied back then to the district's curriculum. So that's just a one example that you could do with an assets-based logic model. Also, it's really important to have a good data analysis protocol. And there are lots of good ones out there. I know you probably have a great one. If you don't have one and you'd like to have one, email me. I'll send you this one. It's important for there to be a data analysis protocol that teachers can use so that teachers are able to go through the process and get past the blame game of which class scored better than another. It's not about that at all. It's about looking at that data and taking the actions after that. So we're looking at class-wide patterns of student performance before talking about individual students. And then, once that they start talking about individual students, they lose focus on the whole, and they usually run out of time. So you want to have a good protocol in place so that teachers can look at the data and have the results that you're looking for, not just looking at the data, recording it, and then closing the book. Typically, when we analyze data, you hear people talking about strengths and needs. But what I recommend is that instead of using needs, use problems. Because when you have a problem statement, that means it's a fact, a statement of fact that's backed up by data, it allows more creative conversation than when you have the word need. If we turn a statement and we just say needs, it usually shuts down the conversation, and it doesn't cause people to think differently and to think deeper about the impact, where it's occurring, what is occurring, and so forth. It doesn't create enough conversation to get to the true root cause. But you can also look in this same format on the other side of the equation and look at the assets. An asset is also a fact that's backed up by data. And these can be about the qualities and talents and skills and connections that are never discussed in problem statements. And again, the beautiful thing about looking at problems and assets is that while we have certain limitations on the problem side because of our accountability and the things that we're required to look at, on the asset side, there are no limits. So each school can be so unique, and it reinforces creative thinking and perceptions of things that make that school a great place to be. So it can really help if we are spending time looking for the things that are positive in our schools. Dr. Victoria Bernhardt, and one of the things that she says is the underlying assumption of working on only improving student achievement results on high stakes tests is that only the students need to improve. And that continuous improvement is about people improvement, all people, our staff, ourselves, everyone. In a continuous improvement environment, everyone is continuing to learn and work. And by using the assets along with the deficits, we can show that continuous improvement is what we're after with everyone. If we're only looking on a negative side, we do things like this. When we develop a problem and we go through certain activities like the 5 whys, and I'm sure that you've done this before in looking at a problem statement, and you ask why 5 times, and it gets down to a root cause. Everyone seems to know about the 5 whys. And if you ask, do you need instruction on how to do this? No, 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 no. I've done this many times. But what I find is when I get into deep conversations with people about this, they really don't understand. So it might be a good time to talk in depth with your principals and others about root causes, or with your teachers if you're at the site level. Because the 5 whys is not perfect. It's not always 5. It could be 3 questions, or it could be 7 questions. And if it were only this simple to just go and have your problem and get down and find a root cause, life would be so good, wouldn't it? But what we find is more often than not, it's more like this when you have a problem. It's very rare that you would find only one root cause to a problem. We're talking about people, and people are very complex. So many times there are multiple reasons why we have problems, and we get down to root causes, but there are also contributing causes that are as much a problem as some of the roots. And so we want to be able to identify those as knowing what's in our control, what is not, what is a root, and what would be a contributing cause. There's another tool that you can use to help identify your contributing cause and root causes, and it's this one right here. Just simply starting in the upper left-hand corner in thinking about your problem. Would the problem have occurred if the cause had not been present? So you're trying to decide if that cause is a root cause or whether it's contributing. And you can see the yes, no throughout this chart. Many times that will help you determine whether you are looking at a root or a contributing cause. Now, it doesn't mean that we ignore contributing causes. Many times we want to address those, but we need to know whether it is contributing or root, because if we are only addressing the contributing causes, that root is still there and will still cause issues. That's why when we put initiatives into place, even if it's going really well, sometimes we find that the problem doesn't go away because we are dealing with a contributing cause, or we have multiple root causes. Another thing that I think is important for schools to remember is that our children hear us, and they know what's printed in the paper, and they know what teachers are saying about schools too. And if we want to help our students make sense of what's happening in the world, what does it do to them when our conversations are always around the deficits? So this young lady hears, well, this is a failing school. It's in the newspaper. It's on the television. My teachers are talking about it. And the child says, I attend this school. And then they hear in school that the 6th grade math scores are the lowest that they've ever been. And the child thinks, I'm a 6th grader. And they hear conversations that students just don't retain what they're taught. And the child interprets that as, I guess I can't learn. So this would be another reason why assets would really play a huge role in our schools. This may be one of the scariest consequences of only looking at the negative in our schools. I love this quote from the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he said, we must look on our children in need, not as problems, but as individuals with potential. And he went on to say, I hope we can find creative ways to draw out of our children the good that there is in each one of them. And I believe that each one of them has good that we can work to draw out. So with our last thing here, I want to show you an example of reframing. Isn't this a cute little guy? This is my grandson, Ben. And when he was in kindergarten, he played t-ball. And if you've never been to a kindergarten t-ball game, you need to go do that. They are hilarious. This is his team when they were out on the field. Do you recognize the diamond out there, the typical baseball diamond? Well, if you can, you're much better than I am, because I couldn't see the diamond at all. They put all the kids out there on the field. And I'll show you a couple of people that'll kind of help you a little bit. This is the coach, and he is on the pitching mound. You can't actually see the batter. He's off to the right here, but that'll give you a little bit of perspective. And then towards the bottom here in the front, you can see the third base that's there. But I want to show you a couple of other little guys. Look at this one out here. He's eating his glove. So I guess maybe he didn't have lunch before he got onto the field. And this little fella, he didn't realize the game was going on the other direction. They're just absolutely hilarious when they play. So this is my grandson. He was up to bat, and it just so happened that he was the first batter. They lined him up in alphabetical order, and B for Ben, he was the first one that batted. And this is his first game that he played. In the T-ball, they get 2 pitches from the coach, and then if you don't hit the ball, you get to hit it from a tee. So the coach pitched the ball, and Ben missed both of them, but they put it on the tee, and he stood up there and he took a big swing, and bam, he hit that ball. So Ben knew what to do. He took off and he was running like crazy, and he ran just as hard as he could to get to first base. But an interesting thing happened. Notice all the parents that are sitting here, and you can't even see all of them. There are several more off to the sides there. As soon as Ben hit that ball, and especially because he was the first batter, it was the first game, when he hit it, everyone started yelling, hollering. They were excited. But as Ben got closer to first base, he started slowing down. And by the time he got on that base, he was a puddle of tears. And so there was a coach standing there, and the coach ran over and just wrapped his arms around him and said, Ben, what is wrong? Everybody is hollering and yelling for you. And Ben said, I know, they're all yelling at me. What did I do wrong? So Ben didn't know the yelling was in support and encouraging him. So what is the creative opportunity now? The coach explained to Ben that it was encouragement, that all the parents on both sides were yelling because they were so excited that he hit the ball, and they were encouraging him to get to the base. So as the coach talked to him, the story changed from deficit to asset. And Ben was wildly motivated and felt successful. Look at his little face. He was so happy about getting on that base. So that is the creative opportunity of reframing. An assets included needs assessment doesn't ignore the cracks, but it fills them with potential. Conducting a CNA is a process. It's a system with continuous processes. We can build a plan and implement a ACSA without a robust needs assessment, but if we do, then we're vulnerable to the cracks in our system. So I encourage you to think about adding some assets to your needs assessment. If you need any more information, please email me. I'm happy to send you tools or have a conversation with you. I hope that this has been helpful to you, and I hope that you have a great afternoon.